They're all coming as far as we know.
Oh, good.
We don't know if they're coming this month. We're gonna wait to see if they stroll in and sit with them. If not, we'll find a place.
Yeah, well, she usually sits right here.
Yeah, I've been told. I don't know if all the girls will, we'll see.
Good. Now, be careful, what brings you here?
That, our
A
niece,
wedding.
our niece had a wedding yesterday afternoon.
Is it her?
And so we were invited to come out to this wedding. As we looked around, we were the oldest people there. There were all these kids. And so we were there for about 4 hours, but when they started handing out the liquor, we
You're not
left.
the oldest guy here now.
Morning. Good to see everybody here this morning. Is it cold or is it just me? It's great. Okay, good to see everybody. Anything that needs to be brought up before I go to prayer? There's a few that we do have to remember. Sister Glenda, Sister Gary, Sister Joanne, Sister Bert.
Brother Gary.
Well, what did you say? Oh, you said sister? No, I said brother. All right. All right. So who else? Sister, oh yes, Sister Letha. Sister Letha, unless some of you weren't aware, Sister Letha's son Michael passed away a couple days ago, and so we got to pray for the family. Got to pray for the family. It's so important, because if we don't pray for each other, who is? That is our obligation as servants of Jesus Christ, that we're there not just in the happy times, but also there when things are not so happy. So please let's remember that family in our prayers. Let's go to God in prayer. Righteous Heavenly Father, as we come before you, we ask, Father, that as this time we have set apart to study a portion of your word, we pray, Holy Father, that whatever is said is done in accordance of your word, Father. Be with us, guard us, forgive us when we fail you. Be with those that are mentioned that are sick, that you be with them and bless them also. If you all possible, Father, bring them back to their health, and especially those, Father, that have lost loved ones, that you be with them and comfort them. Give them the guidance that they will be needing, and help us, Father, to help them. All these favors and blessings we ask through Christ, our Son and your Savior, your Son and our Savior. Amen. This morning we're starting a study on the Church of Corinth. Our sermon outline for this month, was unity, all right? And of all the churches we ever picked for unity, Church of Corinth. And what we've learned, what they did, we shouldn't do, all right? I want to thank Brother Paul for his excellent class on Ecclesiastes, on Jonah, and Song of Solomon. Excellent class. You know, you can't help but to learn something from Brother Paul. And even if you don't want to learn something, he's going to make you learn it, all right? Very, very excellent classes that we have. So what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be looking at Corinth, the city. We're going to be looking at the background, why they were the way they are. There was a reason for it. And then, because today will just be a introduction to 1 Corinthians, because then we'll be getting into that study right there. So I put together here a little bit of history of the city, a little bit history of where they were at this particular point in time, where the church was at this particular point in time, and what is expected of the church today, that there be unity. The people, Corinth, Greece, people have inhabited the area known as Corinth for over 6,000 years. That was a shocker to me. I didn't know it was that old. In time, Corinth grew to become the largest city in Greece. The official recognition of Corinth as a city was around 900 BC. Shortly before his death in March of 44 AD, remember the Ides of March, Julius Caesar ordered the colonization of Corinth, which had been destroyed by Roman forces in 146 BC. The city was built along a narrow neck of land called an isthmus. And I got a picture of that so that we can see that. Isthmus that is connected to the Peloponnesian Peninsula with the mainland. It's just a little narrow strip of land that goes to a larger body, all right? The Peloponnese Peninsula with the mainland, the narrowest point of the isthmus is approximately 5 miles wide. Now, there's a reason why I'm bringing up this isthmus right here. Later through the years, Corinth became a major tourist attraction, and visitors regarded their stay like a participation in a joyous, continual celebration. What that meant was, what happens in Corinth stays in Corinth. It was one of those cities, all right? The city stood 200 feet above sea level. Soil, agricultural-wise, was not the best, but was perfect for vineyards. Grapes, wine, and raisins and related products were the main source of the harvested supply. Pottery and metals such as copper and brass were forged in making utensils also contributed to the economy of Corinth. Corinth and the Isthmus Canal Project. During these ancient times, ships would embark. This was so fascinating here. Ships would embark on the west side of the isthmus or the east side. From there, ships were placed on a huge set of rollers that transported them to the opposite end of the strip of land. The reason for this unique undertaking, sailing around the southern part of the Peloponnesus, was extremely hazardous. This is going to come up. Now watch this. The ancient proverb, round Cape Malea and forget about home. It was very, very dangerous sailing around the southern part of Greece, all right? It was more cost effective, believe it or not, to carry or roll the ships across the land than to chance losing life, ship, and cargo. Nero Caesar understood that if a canal were to be excavated through the length of the 5-mile wide isthmus, this complex undertaking would eventually benefit the Greek and Roman economy tremendously. Nero himself, believe it or not, with a golden spade, ceremoniously started the canal project by digging the first shovel full. When Bob and I were in Greece, we got to see that. Actually got to see this canal. It is amazing, simply amazing. The canal project continued for 75 days by the utilization of the Roman army and 6,000 Jewish prisoners, all right, sent by Vespasian around 69 AD. An uprising in Rome halted the excavation of the canal and wasn't completed until 1893 by the Greek government. So the project started, but it had to stop because of things that were happening in Rome. All right, things weren't going so good there in Rome at this particular time. Corinth and her community buildings and structures. Now this is also very important. Many of the city's public buildings and various structures were built by its wealthy citizens as a service of goodwill to the Corinthian community. Rather than taxation of the populace, it was considered an honor and privilege for a well-to-do patron to personally finance a project that benefited the city. The financier, philanthropist, would give recognition, receive this recognition as his loyalty and generosity to the community. In Romans 16:23, a Corinthian named Erastus, some of you may remember him, he was the chamberlain of the city. His duty as chamberlain or treasurer unlikely included the upkeeping of civil buildings and the city streets and the collection of public revenue, along with overseeing the maintenance of Roman infrastructure such as aqueducts, sewers, and in some cases he may even have acted as a lawyer of sorts to public disputes. Now watch this part right here. Erastus personally financed the construction of one of the main streets in Corinth, and today you can still see that engraving markings on the street he sponsored. It reads, Erastus, in return for his aedileship, that means management position, paved it at his own expense. And I got a picture of that. You can actually see it right there. Erastus, the chamberlain, all right? Roman Corinth's religion and her commerce. Roman Corinth was one of the most important centers of early Christianity. Its importance is augmented by the fact that it is the best known community. Out of all the Roman cities other than Rome, we know more about Corinth than any of the other cities. And I found that very, very interesting. And there's a reason we know more of it, okay? There was a man who actually, his study, this is about 20 years ago, in his study, he was going about looking at Roman structures and how they were built and how Rome would, many times when they engulfed an area, when they overtook an area, they would try to make the city Roman-like. And he says, and the man is not, as far as I know, is not a Christian, but he says, you have to give credit where credit is due. If it wasn't for the Apostle Paul, Luke's writings, okay, the gospel, putting those together, he says, we know more about Corinth because of them. He says, because of their exploration. He says, there's so many different avenues that you could go that we have a better understanding of the city and what was going on at that particular time. All right? Even though the Roman and Greek empires came into power, religion in almost all civilizations was extremely important to the well-being of the city and the state in the worship of their gods. When Rome came to power, loyalty slowly shifted throughout the empire to the new imperial cults such as emperor worship. Jews don't care for that, all right? But we'll see what happened, all right? Local and state gods and deities still played a significant role, but in time their status slowly decreased, and new shrines and temples are now being built next to the older shrines and temples. When Barb and I were in Corinth, you could see all the different temples. Most of them are still there, some in very bad condition, but Corinth kept not just the Athenian gods, but also the Roman gods, and many of them were interchangeable. But the point was, they kept hold of all these gods. There was even Egyptian gods symbols back there in Corinth. All right? I found that very interesting. The Acrocorinth, or the Rock of Corinth, was an elevation of 2,000 feet. This mountain citadel became a strategic lookout, providing adequate warning against her enemies. Atop this natural formation sat the temple of Venus, or Aphrodite. Today, even from the ground level, you can still see the ruins of the once famous temple. When you're there on the main street, you look at this huge mountain, you can still see the ruins of the temple of Aphrodite. Now that temple is going to serve as one of the main focal points without it even being mentioned, according to Paul, because this is where all the immorality took place. The prostitution, the things concerning immoral living, this is where most of it was at. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, the goddess of good feelings and what have you. And this is what Paul had to fight against. This was a normal thing back then. Sometimes I would fail to understand it. It's hard to get people who were once in that to bring them out. When that stuff over here, what it did was it satisfied the fleshly things. All right? That's hard to get rid of. But that's what Paul was dealing with. All right? According to Greek historians, the temple of Aphrodite employed at one time over 1,000 priestesses who managed the worship and served as prostitutes, which was a part of the religious ceremonies. It was all put together. All right? During the reign of Augustus Caesar, Corinth was a thriving metropolis, and the temple of Aphrodite, number one, provided immense wealth to Corinth and Rome. That was the main focal point there in Corinth. Two other temples of significance in Corinth were the temples of Apollo, which is still there, I got a picture of that, and Asclepius, the god of healing and medicine. Other shrines and dedications to other Greek and Roman gods were numerous throughout the city. Corinth was only second to Athens in the entire world in temples and objects of devotion. The population of Corinth during the reign of the early Caesars was approximately 600,000. So that probably put it into the top 5 of the most populated cities, next to Rome, next to Alexandria, Babylon at that, a little bit prior. Huge community. And of those 600,000, 400,000 were slaves. So who do you think they depended on for their economy? The work being done, all right? Second in population was the Greek community, and the third largest group were Jews and foreigners. The Romans who lived there were considered themselves more Roman than Rome, and the Greek populace considered themselves more Greek than Athens. That showed their pride. We're better than Rome. We're better than Athens. That was the mentality back then. They were a very proud people. Corinth became the capital of the Achaean province and was ruled by a Roman proconsul or governor during the time of the Caesars. The office of governor was usually a 2-year term appointed by Caesar or the Roman Senate. During Paul's years, a year and a half in Corinth, Lucius Junius Gallio was the governor of Achaia around 51 AD. You can read about him in the Bible, in Acts. Paul stood before Gallio to give an account of himself. All right, we'll get into this right here. Paul was brought before Gallio concerning religious matters. The leaders of this Jewish synagogue had accused Paul of sedition concerning Mosaic law and Jewish custom. And where Gallio actually stood is still there. I even stood there. I even started to feel proud. All right? But the point being, that is still there. And where Paul stood is still there because there's a little, I guess you would call pillar, where whoever was taken before the court system stood before this pillar. That was the custom, and to give an account of himself. And you can actually stand there yourself. Along with the various arts, philosophy was a prized discipline in Corinth. The pupils of these philosophical universities were fiercely dedicated, not just dedicated, but fiercely dedicated to their chosen brand of philosophy and to their teachers, oftentimes to the point of violence. Sporting events such as the Isthmus Athletic Games were held every 2 years. Athens and her Olympic Games were held every 4 years. These two events were extremely important to the Corinthian people and to her economy. Travelers and athletes from all over the world participated in these events. Remember Paul says we run a race for a crown? He's looking out the window, and he's pretty much describing what he's seen, but now he's going to put a religious significance behind it. But Corinth had a negative characteristic to the well-being of her character. The indulgence of these people had no limits. These indulgences included drunkenness, sexual immorality, extreme division between the classes, and lawsuits was extensively common. Can you see all these? See what it's building up now? Do you think some of these things are going to enter into the church? What do you think? Well, that was the environment. It was going to happen, all right? To act the Corinthian was a phrase depicting the characteristic of the city in general. And what did that mean? Someone who was drunk. In Greek plays, a Corinthian always was portrayed as one who slurred his words and could barely walk. So it was kind of a running joke to act the Corinthian. Oh yeah, they're a drunkards. They just love to drink. Another one of her characteristics was argumentation and questioning all and everything. It wasn't just a matter of, well, what do you think? I mean, they really got down to brass tacks. Again, to the point of almost physical violence. Moderation was not a word in the Corinthian vocabulary. These were a wild bunch. Now we're going to look at the church. The above is just a brief description of Corinth and her history. Now we will look at the church of Corinth during the time of Paul's ministry. Almost every aspect of the city and her undesirable sensibilities is reflected in the general makeup of the church. You know, I love history, but you don't need it to be saved, all right? But for me, it helped me to understand more of what was going on. Again, you don't need it. We need to know what we got to do. But for me, it was just so much a better of a foundation for me. The negative sensibilities displayed in the church stem from the detrimental behavior of the Corinthian community in general. To make matters worse, after Paul left Corinth, there's a book out there, one of the best I've ever read, and that's exactly the topic. What happened to Corinth when Paul left? Things drastically turned for the worst. Almost all of it was because of the Jews and the Roman government. They did not like one another. You do this to me, I'll do this to you. Finally, Rome said, I've had enough. I'm going to make things harder. Remember Nero, the burning of Rome, all those kind of things? That kind of started back then, all right? To make matters worse, after Paul left Corinth, Rome's attitude toward the Jews and the religion in general started to take a severe turn for the worst. Rome's negative perception of the Jews mirrored the same attitude towards the Christians, because according to the Romans, Christianity and Judaism were almost one and the same. All right? In order to start a religion in the Roman Empire, you had to get permission. Well, the Jews already had their permission from the government to be Jews, all right? And what they considered Christianity, just an offshoot, so that's why Christianity was never really discussed in those terms, all right? Rome's negative perception of the Jews mirrored the same attitude towards the Christians, thinking the two are one and the same. And the question is, why the dramatic change in Rome's perception? Something happened. When Paul arrives in Corinth, he meets Aquila and Priscilla. Remember them? These two Jewish believers had just been expelled from Rome by Claudius Caesar. He did that twice. In AD 49, Claudius banished all Jews from Rome because of their continual rioting over Christus, likely a Latinized Christos or Messiah in Hebrew. The most likely explanation is that the Jews who had been under the apostolic teaching in Jerusalem had returned to Rome and brought the message of Jesus Christ as the Messiah to the synagogues of Rome. Many scholars believe this is when it started. In AD 41, Claudius put restrictions on Jews meeting together. Jews were able to meet once a week, and everybody else was not allowed that privilege under Roman law. If you were a trader of some time, whether gold or brass or pottery, your guild, your union was allowed to meet only once a month. Rome thought if you try to gather more than once a month, you're up to no good. But the Jews were allowed to meet once a week on the Sabbath. So things are going to start to change a little bit negative towards the Jews because of who they were, all right? The same year, a delegation which included the well-known Jewish philosopher Philo, many of you may be acquainted with him, all right? He petitioned the Emperor Caligula on behalf of the Jews in Alexandria. It didn't turn out so well, all right? And we'll get to that. The Jews in Alexandria had continually complained about Rome not caring about their unique and specific needs. Caesar, in his reply to the Jews of Egypt, believed he had bent over backwards, which he had done, in dealing with them. He stated that their complaints and ungratefulness was getting tiresome. This is what he states: if you keep provoking me, I will revoke all of your privileges and amenities. There's even documented the letter that Caesar responds to the Alexandrian Jews. He says, I'm sick and tired of your continual complaining. I have done more for you than any other religious groups. And this is how you pay me back. He says, you keep it up, it's going to get ugly. I wish I had brought it, but I've got that letter. The Jewish expulsion in Rome at that time created a bitter hatred of Jews throughout the empire. How Rome was thinking trickled down everywhere throughout the empire, which in turn, this hatred would include Christians. Because of the Jewish negative mindset, Caesar had stated that the Jews were haters of mankind. Before this negative situation intensified, Rome's outlook towards the Jews was tolerable at best. Now Rome felt it was pushed to the point of complete disfavor towards them, and below are some of the allowances Rome had already allowed the Jews, and you won't believe it. The Jews were permitted to gather to meet once a week for religious purposes. Well, okay. Other groups, Rome and otherwise, were not authorized this privilege. Those in various guilds and trades were only permitted to meet once a month. Otherwise, gatherings more than once a month could be considered undesirable for the stability of Rome. Very paranoid. This was to avoid sedition tendencies, that is, plotting against Rome. You guys are up to no good if you want to meet more than once. Remember the riot in Ephesus? Great is Diana of the Ephesians? That was an illegal assembly. And that government, that local government right there, is going to have to report back to Rome exactly what happened. Remember the town clerk came and says, men and brethren, listen, everybody knows that our Diana, this great goddess, fell from the sky and is worshipped everywhere. We got to stop this gathering right here. It is an illegal gathering. Otherwise, we're going to be brought in question to this day. And it did happen, all right? Jewish males were exempt from serving in the Roman army. For religious reasons, the Jews would refuse to fight on Sabbath, plus they would refuse to eat pork or various foods considered unclean. I never thought of that. That's pretty much what happened. I'm not going to serve in your army. If it comes on Sabbath, just kill me, all right? Throughout the empire, if possible, look at this now. Rome provided government-sponsored butcher shops. I didn't know that. Kosher butcher shops with a rabbi overseeing the process. After Paul left Corinth, just a few weeks just after Paul was there, Rome no longer provided this unique amity. Hence, the question of eating meat offered to idols was never a topic when he was there. Because when you read 1 Corinthians, all of a sudden he brings up,
you can't eat meat offered to idols. And I would say, Paul, you were there a year and a half. How come you didn't bring that up? How come all of a sudden this is a new topic? Well, because it wasn't that way back then. They had a way, the Jews, of obtaining meat that was considered kosher. All right? Hence the question of eating meat offered to idols was never a topic when Paul was there. Jews were exempt from emperor worship or participating in various festivals dedicated to the Roman gods. But this is what they did, though. In exchange for not taking part in these practices, the Jewish priests offered sacrifices in Jerusalem on behalf of the Caesars and the Roman Empire. That's how they got around it. We can't bow down before you. If you're going to make us, just kill us right now. But we will, if it's okay, we'll offer sacrifices to whoever you want us to. Caesar, the empire, whatever. And Rome says, well, okay. Famine occurred 3 times during the ministry of Jesus and the apostles. Because of the Jews, if it were possible, look at this now. Rome did not distribute grain on the Sabbath during the famines. Can you imagine what the other people felt? Why are they given this privilege? They're outsiders. They're not one of us. All right? If a Jewish synagogue was damaged or destroyed, whether it be a natural disaster or a result of war, Rome would rebuild it without a cost at all. That's what they felt about religion. They would do any and everything to maintain. The more gods, the merrier. And if your temple is destroyed, we'll fix it. But don't cause trouble. Don't cause problems, okay? In general, the Jewish community was allowed many privileges, but after the expulsion of the Jewish people in Rome, the above list, the atmosphere towards the Jews had deteriorated drastically. Laws concerning sexual activity was very strict. Another area, I thought it was just rampant, but it wasn't. Activities of this kind, to Roman sensibilities, showed a lack of family stability, which would lead to the breakdown of Roman values in general. Adultery and incest were at the top of the list when it came to immoral and unacceptable behavior. I always thought that was just everywhere. It was rampant, but it wasn't. Okay? If any of these laws were broken, the obligation of the person harmed was given 60 days to bring the charges before the court. Remember the man who took his father's wife? All right? Took his father's wife? That was the extreme no-no. That man, the real husband, he was obligated to report that. That was not allowed. If anyone saw this happening, they were allowed to come forward. The man in Corinth, taking his father's wife, the whole church knows about it. The community all probably knows about it. Paul says, these things are not even happening among the barbarians. So anybody, or we'll get into this, anybody who knew about this, who did not come forward, you were either fined, jailed, lost your citizenship, or exiled. Now, who else is brought into this mix that knows about it? The Apostle Paul, all right? After 60 days, if the injured person did not come forward, anyone was given the authority to inform the court system. And if no one came forward and the courts became aware, all involved would be fined, jailed, or exiled with loss of citizenship. Personal property would be seized. Philosophical schools were known to be factious and divisive towards the other philosophical schools. Unfortunately, this harmful behavior crept into the Corinthian church. I am a student of Paul. I'm a student of Peter. I'm a student of Apollos. I'm a student of Christ. So can you see all that outside stuff is coming in? That's what happens when you have people. All right? It's going to happen. This divisive attitude became apparent not only between the various factions within the congregation, but also between the wealthy and the poor. The haves appeared not to show any sympathy toward the have-nots. The Lord's Supper was abused, something Paul never preached. All right? Drunkenness, some of this is opinion, and this is some of the things that's kind of cloudy, but I thought it was interesting. Drunkenness apparently was part of the abuse of the Lord's table. All right? women were taking a vocal part in the service, or in the very least, interrupting the worship service. Debate as to which spiritual gifts was the most desirable, they were fighting over that. A man having relations with his father's wife, brother is now taking brother to court. The Corinthian attitude was, there is no problem so menial or trivial that the court system can't resolve. Remember my sermon last week, brother taking brother to court? Out in the open, if you said that individual is a so-and-so, that was a legitimate thing to take to the court. But in the trial, you could say whatever you wanted. So you had to be very, very careful. And this thing about incest, about marrying within the family, Caesar did it. But he changed the law. He says, you cannot marry a family member. But Nero fell in love with his brother's daughter. So he changed the rule. That's not incest. But if you fall in love with your sister's daughter, don't do that. That's horrible. So what they did many times was take the rules and regulations and bend them for themselves, but don't you dare do it. Don't you do it, all right? The various problems that plagued the church stem from the sensibilities of the Corinthian environment. The negative situation that was evident in the society of Corinth was now displayed in the church. Again, the question begs to be asked, why was this happening? Various theories among scholars and commentators, the old adage, when the cat's away. When Paul left, all right? Another plausible possibility, which many agree, when Paul left Corinth, new converts unacquainted with Paul's teaching, their influence may have swayed the weaker members to question what previously had been taught. I never thought of that, but it's possible. As women speaking during the worship service, this may have been women who had an authoritative position in the Corinthian government system, because many women had an authoritative role. This is one of the few communities in the Roman government where women did have a say-so. Same thing happened in Athens when Paul was there on the Areopagus. You men of Athens, what are you doing right here, worshiping other gods? And at the very end of Paul's speech right there, there's a woman named Damaris that was there on Mars Hill, okay, that was there. Normally women were not allowed there unless they had a position. So we see that the sentiment or the thinking of women being involved slowly started to change during Paul's time. Plus some of the priestesses of the temple of Aphrodite, who did have an authoritative rule, may not be members of the church and would explain their unscriptural participation in the worship service. And one thing I never considered, but I remember my dad always preaching to me, when you look at the tongues, the speaking in tongues in the church of Corinth, it's always in the male pronoun, not the female. I didn't know that. So apparently, the men were the only ones who were allowed in the service to speak in other tongues, but the women were to keep silent. But it kind of looks like maybe everybody was participating. This was not God's plan. Most of all the problems that faced the modern church, the church at Corinth had already experienced. Lack of unity, disrespect to what constitutes the work of the church, immorality was overlooked to the point of being ignored or condoned. Personal grievances had progressed into civil litigation. These problems infiltrated the church's well-being after Paul had left Corinth. This is a picture of the isthmus right here. We can see right here that small, see where it says isthmus right there? That's approximately 5 miles wide. That's where they did the construction of this roadway for the ships to pass. Otherwise, going around was extremely hazardous. This is the temple of Apollo. Bob and I couldn't find it. We got a picture, we're standing in front of it, and I wanted to write on it, Jesus is good, but you can't do that kind of stuff. But that's the size of it right there. Smaller than this building. The movies, I guess, are wrong, all right? But that was the size of it right there. This is the temple of Aphrodite in Corinth, or what's left of it. From the ground, you can still see it. That's how immense it was. Huge. Everything under the sun happened here. Meat offered to idols, the immorality, the things that were going on. This is where it happened, all right? The Bema seat of corn, judgment seat. That's what that is right there. And Gallio stood right about here. I got to stand there too. All right? And see right here in the corner, that little thing right there? It's a little pillar about that tall. And there's a hole, you really can't see it in that picture, drilled through it. Whoever stood before Gallio or the court was chained, and that chain would go around through that little hole. Symbolic. I mean, what are you going to do? All right? Well, that's where Paul stood. That's where he stood right there. Here's that Corinthian canal. They only got, I think they only said about 100 yards or so, the original excavation, and then had to be halted. And they were able to come just a little bit further, and they had to stop. It was just so cost effective, it just didn't work. It wasn't until the 1800s that the French were able to finish this immense project right here. Now this right here is the Erastus pavement. You can actually stand right there, and you can barely see the lettering right there, but right there it says Erastus, R-A-S-T-V-S right there. And that's his title right there. You can't see you don't see all of it, but Erastus the Chamberlain personally financed this street. So it's there. It's there. And to me, I don't need it, but it's marvelous to see when you see everyday things. It's what's in the Bible, you know. We don't need it, you know. It's by faith. It's by faith. But stuff like this, it just fascinates me. Now here is a larger picture. There's Athens right there, and as you go west or to the left, you see that little tiny part right there of that isthmus right there. That's where the canal was dug. All right, that helped the economy so much back then, and unfortunately helped all the other things that were going on. All right. This is what Paul was against, or was up against, trying to get these people out of that. And do you think that was easy? That was probably one of the hardest things he probably ever did, because all that stuff is right there, okay? It's all right there, and he's trying to teach them. The Greeks first said, God gave you the 5 senses for a reason, to enjoy, to do this, to do that. But the Stoics would say, well, yeah, okay, but only in moderation. See, I love prime rib, but if I had it every day, I don't think I'd care for it. So that's what the Stoics were saying. Moderation, moderation. But then you had the other extreme. Another thing against what Paul was up against some of them did not believe in a resurrection. That'll be part of my sermon this morning. Did not believe in a physical resurrection. Greek society and Roman society they believed in the afterlife for the souls, but not for the human body, a physical resurrection right there. But yet they were still baptizing for the dead. There's only one verse in the entire Bible that talks about being raised from the dead, and Paul is only saying it in passing. But some have used that as one of the pillars of their faith, to baptize for one another. Why are you baptizing for one another if you don't even believe in the resurrection? It does not make sense. Well, the whole society didn't make sense to me. It didn't. Anybody have any questions or anything? Something that needs clarification, or I just didn't explain well enough? Lord willing, next Lord's Day, we're going to be looking at 1 Corinthians, and we're going to be looking a little bit in Acts. We're going to be looking a little bit in other places that will give us a good foundation what Paul was up against. He was there for 1.5 years. He was scared. The Lord had to appear to him and say, Paul, no one's going to harm you. I have many, many people here. So you know where he was located? Right next to the synagogue. It joined hard. He was right there. The Jewish people did not want to accept what Paul was preaching. He had to leave. He says, okay, fine, I'm going to go to the Gentiles now. I'll go to them. So he goes there just next door, and for 1.5 years established this wonderful church that had many problems. But if that church can turn around, if that church can do what God asks of them, I know we can too. The plea for unity was what all Paul ever preached, that we all speak the same thing, that we all do the same thing as servants of Jesus Christ. So that is our job as Christians. And again, Lord willing, next Lord's Day, we will look more into 1 Corinthians. Thank you very much.